Today, we are talking about the importance of focus and also implementing professional management in your company in order to keep up the growth, in order to have a successful company. My guest today is Dan Longhouse, and I'll tell you more about him in a second, so stay tuned.
Welcome to the Smart Business Revolution podcast, where we feature top entrepreneurs, business leaders, and thought leaders and ask them how they built key relationships to get where they are today. Now, let's get started with the show.
Welcome, everyone. John Corcoran here. I'm the host of the show. And, every week I get to talk to smart entrepreneurs, founders, and CEOs from all kinds of companies. We've had Netflix and Kinko's, YPO, EO, Activision Blizzard, LendingTree, Grubhub, Redfin, and many more. And this week is no exception. Of course, this episode brought to you by our company, Rise25 and Podcast Copilot, where we help B2B businesses get clients, referrals, and strategic partnerships with done-for-you podcasts and content marketing. And you can email us at support@rise25.com or go to rise25.com to learn more about what we do. All right. And first, big shout out to the EO Entrepreneurs Organization Entrepreneurial Masters Program, which is how I met today's guest. His name is Dan Longhouse. We were both in that program together. He's the founder and president of LHT Learning. It's a company that he started over 20 years ago, and they provide training services to Fortune 500 companies. And he started out doing web development, eventually focused on learning and innovation, and has started a couple of different companies along the way. And so we will get to share some of that journey as well. And he's really been affected by taking an approach of putting in place professional management and management systems, inspired in part by the book E-Myth Revisited, which is a great book. Definitely inspired me as well. And also the book Traction by Gino Wickman, another wonderful book as well. And Dan, such a pleasure to have you here today. And I love to start people off by going back to their childhood and focusing on any entrepreneurial ventures or side hustles they had as a kid. And I think this is a first for me. You were actually hustling kids at pool and depriving them of their candy, you ruthless bastard. So tell us a little bit how that worked.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we had a pool table growing up, and so that's something that I guess gave me an advantage because people always came to our house, right? So I always had a chance to practice before they came over, and I would always get them to bet more and more candy, and then eventually just keep winning. But they kept betting.
Now, did you ever go into a pool hall and feign that you'd never played pool before and hustle people there?
No, we thought about it, but we were too young. Would have been ideal, but yeah.
Yeah, I was like that as a kid. We didn't have a pool table, but we had a ping pong table for a while. And so I was pretty good at ping pong and would go and hustle people. And then we also had, I grew up and tail end of the 80s when video games were kind of starting to phase out. And my dad went to an auction and bought a full scale video, those arcade games, right? That was massive type of thing. It was Zaxxon is what it was called. And I remember my brother and I just played it for hours and got so good at it. And then one time this, vendor, or electrician or something came to the house and was like, "Oh, Zaxxon, I'm pretty good at that." And my dad was like, "Oh yeah, you want to play my 7-year-old?" And the guy plays my brother. My brother just creamed him, of course. So I love those types of hustles. But you after hustling other kids for their candy, you got into business with web development in college, and you had a friend who had a connection to a pool, and you set up a pool camera to watch the pool. Tell us about that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So college was really when that sort of entrepreneur spirit came into play. So I had a buddy that he knew the pool really well, and they needed a website. And I was an engineering major, but I loved doing web development. And so we sort of paired up, went to the pool, got all the information. He set up a video camera, and then we had a live feed on the website so you could see if the pool was busy, what the weather was like, and we built it. And I think they paid us, I don't know, $1,000, which for a college kid was fantastic.
Yeah.
And I'll never forget, we were down on campus, and I said, "Hey, this is great. Let's go build websites for some other pools." There's a bunch of pools around, and he just kind of looked at me like, I don't know if I want to do that." I'm like, "Well, what do you mean? We could start a company." And he just kind of looked at me and shrugged and was like, "Well, I'd rather just eat pizza and drink beer." And I said, "Well, why don't we eat pizza, drink beer, and start a company?" And he just he just kind of shrugged and was like, I don't really want to do that. So we didn't get as far as we wanted because he had all the connections, but he wanted to just kind of chill.
I guess the lesson there is the importance of founder alignment.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So you move on and you actually end up working for IM's company, the pet food company, doing web development for them. So kind of experience in the corporate world. Tell us about that.
Yeah. So I moved on from the web development piece, and then had a friend who was talking about how he didn't really like his job. And I said, well, what kind of work do you do? And he said, I do web development and build learning courses. And I said, well, I love doing that. He said, okay, well, give me your resume and I'll send it over to our bosses because we need to replace my role. And I sent it in and went in for an interview, and they had 3 bosses. So the first boss went in and his name was Dan. I'm like, okay, great. Well, this is going to go really well. And it went well. He said, yeah, it seems like a good fit. So he sent me over to the second boss and walked in, and his name was Dan. I'm like, okay, well, this is interesting. And interview went well. And then he said, all right, let me take you over to the third boss. And his name was Scott. I kind of laughed, and I'll tell you why in a minute. And sat down, had a great interview. And he said, look, we want to hire you, but we can't call you Dan. What's your middle name? And I said, well, you're not going to believe, but my middle name is Scott. And he said, all right, well, we're just going to call you the intern. And so it ended up being, they basically called me the intern for 2 years, and they would walk over and go, intern, you're fired. And it was kind of a running joke for a while.
You guess you have a good relationship with them to not get freaked out by that.
Right. Yeah, I don't think
some people get triggered. So that role eventually, you graduate from college and tell me how you turned that into a contract, which allowed you to start your company.
Yeah, so they were bought out by Procter and Gamble. So there was a hiring freeze at that time, and so they said, "Hey, we have all this work that we want you to do, but we can't hire you." I said, "Okay, well, perfect. Well, why don't we do some sort of contract?" And so, they were kind enough to do that, and so I started the company. And then initially, it was just me doing contractor work for the first part of the first year or so.
And you picked up some other contracts through networking. Do you remember the early days of how you got those initial clients?
I did. Yeah. One of them was a connection through college. They had reached out and said, "Hey, we're a learning company and we're looking for folks." And I sat down with him and got set up as a consultant for them. And then another one was a friend's father who had a small 2 to 3 person consulting company. And so I just randomly approached him at a party and said, "Hey, I want to introduce myself. Here's what I do." And I ended up doing some work with him as well.
How did you make that transition from it just being you who sells the business and fulfills on the business, builds the website or whatever, to transitioning into actually building a company and hiring employees?
Yeah, so there was a larger role that we landed with a motor oil company. And so their challenge was they were trying to figure out how to build training for the folks that were selling motor oil, right? So if you walk into a store, there's a bunch of motor oil. They have to train that person that doesn't work for them how to sell it and why their product's better. And so as we were building that, there was another vendor. And when I say we, it's me at that time, right? And there's another vendor that was also building courses, and they didn't do a very good job, and they were let go. And so I went into the folks that ran it and said, "Look, you're already happy with me building these courses. Why don't you let me bring on a couple people and we'll take over the work that they were doing?" And they just kind of said, "Oh, sure. Yeah, I mean, you're doing a good job. We'll give that a try." And so that was when I hired the first set of people. And the relationship was really, me kind of managing it and then them doing the work. But then I was also continuing to do the work as well.
Yeah. And now, 20 years ago, 2003, 2004, 2005, there weren't many, I don't believe, e-learning platforms out there. I've watched it more closely because I started creating my own online courses maybe around, I want to say 2009, maybe 2010. But even now to this day, there's been so much evolution. Were you creating things from scratch in the early days when you started to do e-learning?
We were, yeah. Somebody would meet with the subject matter experts, build out content, and then we would develop it in an authoring tool. The main authoring tool back then was Adobe Flash, if you remember Flash.
Wow. That was what you used for building an e-learning course. Now we got Teachable,
Yeah.
we've got Thinkific, we've got all these different amazing software products out there.
Yeah, that was it. And then Macromedia had a product. I'm forgetting the name of it. I got certified in it and then it went away. Flash kind of took it over after that. But yeah, it was all Adobe Flash mainly, and then some basic web development on top of that, so that you could publish out courses and put them out on learning management systems. But yeah, you're right. There weren't a lot of companies that were doing it at the time, and that was where we were able to bring. Like, my passion was always around learning, technology, innovation, and that was where I saw an opportunity to bring that into the field, because it just was not. It really wasn't there. You didn't have a lot of tech folks that were heavily involved.
What was it that, you started with web development, but what drew you to kind of niche down into e-learning?
It just kind of happened, honestly. I mean, at that time, it was all about, go to the West Coast and work for these startups. And so that was sort of the idea. But then I kept getting pulled into learning. And eventually I just went, hey, there's a huge opportunity here. And I love the space. So I'm really going to start to focus on this, because even while I was building these courses, we were still building web applications on the side. So that was really it. We just kept getting pulled back into it. And finally, we just sort of accepted it and went, yeah, this is a great space. There's a lot of opportunity, and we have a lot that we can bring to the table around kind of innovation and creativity.
Right. And you live in Columbus, Ohio. I've never been to Columbus, but I've always heard it's kind of got its own tech vibe to it, and a lot of startup companies in over the last 10, 15 years that has accelerated. Talk a little bit about that community and what it's been like being located there with this company.
Yeah, absolutely. So I moved here in 2005. So it's grown substantially over the years. Yeah, there's a great tech community. I've tried to get more involved in the space. Even with EO, we've got a pretty healthy accelerator program. So a lot of startup companies that are then moving into the main EO program. But yeah, it's been a great network. There's a lot of energy, a lot of opportunities for pitches and for investing in pitches. So yeah, it's been a great location to be in.
Now, one of the challenges you've had over the years has been focus, which we previewed in the beginning, focus versus opportunity. And you've started 3 companies along the way. I believe one of those 3 is still active. What was the first one? Was it DIY eLearning? Was that the first one that you started on the side?
It was, yeah. Yeah. So running a professional services firm, you have to bring more people on to land more work. And so really wanted to try to find something product based. And so DIY learning, the idea behind it is that a non-technical person could fill out a bunch of text fields on a website, click a button, and then it would generate games and interactions. The problem we ran into, it was purely based on Adobe Flash. So the output was a single file. Once that went away and people moved to HTML5, now you've got a bunch of files that you have to send to people. And it was just a struggle to help people understand how to include that in things like PowerPoint and other programs. So unfortunately, because of technology, that one went away. But yeah, we had a great run with that, landed some big projects with Adobe.
It seems like the lesson there in that one was be careful what technology you build your solution on.
Absolutely, yeah, and plan ahead and just keep an eye on that. And I think at the same time, you also have to recognize, I think we did a good job of recognizing, okay, our end user is struggling to take this and to be able to use it. And so I think that's something as well, to recognize that and be okay with the fact that that's happening, and to go in a different direction.
Yeah. The other one you started was Compliance Cartoons.
Yeah. So the idea behind that is, within compliance, it's really difficult to educate people on these policies and highly regulated areas. So the idea was to bring games and other types of interactions, excuse me, to that space. And so we would have these off-the-shelf topics, and then people could basically take those and customize them for themselves.
Okay.
Those ended up turning into custom work. So again, we ended up back at building more custom work, basically. So that's where that one went.
So if I can kind of try and figure out an overarching theme between all of your companies up until this point, it's helping companies with creating engaging learning online and other efforts related to that.
That's correct. Yeah, it's the core within learning is how do we take really complex topics, especially within compliance, and come up with innovative, creative ways to get that to people in a way that they can understand it. That's kind of the core of the solutions that we've been coming up with.
Yeah. The interesting thing about that is then the third company that you start on the side is Soundsmack, which, well, first you can tell us about that one.
Yeah. So that one, again, this was during a time when I kind of thought, hey, every idea is a good idea. And I love idea generation. I love taking ideas, breaking it down, figuring out how to start companies out of it. And that was one where somebody had sound effects. And so the niche there was that we were going to come into the market with really high quality sound effects. And so we lifted a site and rolled that out. And that is still active. That is something that we still have.
Got it. It's interesting about that is the other two were more related to what you do with LHT, and the Soundsmack one kind of seems a little bit more of a parallel from it, something different.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, that's again where there's that sort of lack of focus, I think, in terms of just trying to start lots of different companies. That was again what I just thought you could start a company, throw out a website and a product, and everything would just happen. Right?
Yeah.
You don't need sales. You don't need marketing. You don't need customer support. I can do it all myself. And so there was a big learning moment there for sure.
With the combination of all these. And there was another one, I believe, where you went to a conference in Chicago and you were developing an idea for a conference for another product as well. Tell us about that one.
Yeah. So that was part of DIY learning. So, again, with lack of focus, I was trying to do it all myself. And on the drive up, we were finalizing the product that we were demonstrating at the conference. So I was sitting in the front seat developing the product, trying to get it ready to actually present it at the conference, right? So again, it's that I was just trying to do it all, and I thought that's just what you do.
Yeah, and so it seems like you kind of came to a realization that you need to go back to the original business which you started and focused on, and really kind of drill down and focus on that.
That's exactly right. Yeah, that's sort of where we stepped back and said, okay, this is our core. This is where the clients are. Let's stay focused here.
And at what point did you read eMyth Revisited, and what was the impact that had on you?
Yeah, that was a huge one, because that was the first time somebody said the idea of working on a business versus in a business. And I mean, that just completely changed the way that I think about running an organization at that point. So that was a huge game changer, I would say. And it helped me kind of look back and go, oh, that makes so much sense. When you start these companies, you need to get help. You need to bring people in, and that's okay to bring people in earlier so that I can work on the business and not get stuck doing it all because I think I have to, right?
And you end up, there's a program called Aileron, I believe it is, that's in Dayton, Ohio, which introduced you or kind of helped you with this journey of putting good management in place. Tell us about that one.
Yeah. So right around the time after reading eMyth, I had reconnected with my old boss, Scott, and he was working for Aileron. He said, hey, you should check out their class for presidents. And it was a 2-day class. And I kind of thought, I don't really need that. I'll figure it out. And then I, kind of went, well, if he's recommending it, he's a mentor, I'm going to go do it. Right. And went to it. And it was just, the best way I can describe it, probably similar to EMP, is like, it just sort of opened a little door in my brain. And there's just a whole library of information that I didn't even know existed around professional management. Excuse me, I'm losing my voice. And that changed everything. That allowed me to take a step back and say, all right, how do you really grow an organization? How do you really structure an organization? Because before that, it was more about execution.
And then EOS and Traction, the book Traction by Gino Wickman. Also, you come across this one at some point?
Yeah, I read that, and that just very much aligned with my way of thinking and where I knew that we needed to go with the organization. And so we went all in on that, completely integrated it, rolled it out, and that has been one of the single most influential things for the organization, I would say.
Yeah. I think I'm going to voice a little bit of imposter syndrome here. But, if I was you and I'd started this company, straight out of college, I think I would have run into challenges with, upgrading your clientele. Now you have, focus on Fortune 500 companies, and you start focusing on pharma and medical device companies. How do you think you got over that internal imposter syndrome that, holds so many people back in order to focus on these bigger and bigger companies and complex solutions?
I mean, I think for me, I had gotten so burnt out and had thought I knew what I was doing. I was at a point where when that solution came, I was so bought into it and so bought into the idea of clearly I don't know how to do it. So how do I do things differently? And so the idea of getting into a niche such as pharma and med device, which is a space that we had already done a lot of work in, it just made sense. I knew that I couldn't do it all. And we started to see that we can't be everything for everybody. And so I think really deciding who we are and then staying focused on that, which is still hard. I mean, I still want to start a bunch of different companies, right? So it's tough, but I think I was in such a low place that I finally just said, this makes sense. Let's just go all in and do it.
Yeah. COVID happens in 2020.
Yeah.
You're in the e-learning space. Hindsight being 2020, now we look back on it and we think, oh, that would seem like a great company to have going into a global pandemic, but it wasn't quite that way, at least initially for you.
No, definitely not. I mean, I think when it first hit, immediately what all the corporations did is say, hey, stop bringing in vendors, right? Stop bringing in professional service companies. And so what we ended up doing is just sort of bunkering down and saying, all right, we got to get through October. And during that time, we actually had built another product because we said, hey, well, we got time. Why don't we build another product? And so we
What was that product?
That product was something that we built for teachers. So the idea was we partnered with somebody that had content, and we built a series of courses to help teachers transition to virtual training, right? Because everybody was struggling with that.
Yeah.
The difficulty was everybody was so busy in getting inundated with content, digital content, that it was tough to get it in front of the right people.
Yeah.
And then after COVID, I would say towards the end of 2020, companies finally said, all right, COVID's here, we're moving to virtual, let's start investing in learning. So 2021, really, we saw a big increase in like VC money coming in and corporations coming and saying, hey, we want to build a big learning program. We're going to move everything to virtual, all of our in-person. So 2021 ended up being a good year for the learning space as a whole.
Yeah. Of course, there were a lot of companies that then the pendulum swung back again, where people got, Zoom fatigue. Did you experience that as well?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it ended up being kind of a hybrid solution where people would do Zoom, but then they would also try to do more spaced out instructor-led training of some type, because that was the big message was, hey, we know we need to move to virtual, but Zoom for 8 hours a day is just frying people, and nobody's digesting that information. And part of it ended up being the older traditional ways of learning, which is, hey, give me a chunk of content, throw it at me. That sort of went away. And now we started to be able to say, okay, let's space things out over time. Let's do more retention on smaller chunks.
And what do you focus on now? As we record this is mid 2024. There's been, everyone talks about kind of like a shift in attention, where people are focused on smaller and smaller content, the TikTokification, if that's a word,
Absolutely.
of entertainment and consumption, and especially younger generations. I don't know if this is true or not, but supposedly have shorter attention span. So where does that leave you?
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly what we're seeing, right? I mean, I would say the majority of our work, again, is in that pharma med device space, right? So when you think of larger organizations, we do a lot of work with like Johnson & Johnson, Pfizer, right? Their big thing is, how do we find creative and effective ways to educate people on these very difficult legal topics, right? And so when you think about those things like TikTok and those quicker ways of getting people information, that's what we have to start bringing into the learning space. And that's what we started to do more and more. And so they really rely on us to bring that sort of innovation, right? Or the other one we see a lot is we recently worked with a company where they had a bunch of outdated material and they were still using that traditional, heavy learning courses on compliance. Let me push this out. Hey, you did it. Everybody's good now, right? And we know that doesn't work, right? And so we come in those scenarios, work with the chief compliance officer, build out a roadmap for the next 2 to 3 years to build a more larger learning program. And then once we build out those different types of learning interactions, you can add in analytics. Now we can pull out measurement. Now we can see how people are learning. And then if we can identify risks in those learning courses or whatever they are, now we have the opportunity to say, okay, people struggled with this topic. Now let's push out, on a monthly basis or something, smaller, like a little social media campaign on the compliance intranet site, or, funny memes. We're doing that with a client right now as well. So it has drastically changed in terms of the way compliance is seen and the way that they push out.
I'm just curious for you, I'm a recovering lawyer, so I have an idea of what a general counsel in a big pharma company is like personally. And I can imagine that you approaching them and saying, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to do a 2-minute TikTok style video of you talking about XYZ complicated legal compliance topic. How do you manage that conversation? How do you convince them of the wisdom of it and get them to go along with your vision?
Absolutely. So sometimes we don't have to, because they've tried the old model, right? Which is the big courses, check the box. And then, they either, they can get fines, right? Big lawsuits and fines, or, just as a whole, they're just, the onboarding's not going well because people don't understand the right way to do compliance. So they're getting in trouble. So a lot of times we don't really have to, because they're coming in and saying, hey, we have all of these outdated materials. We don't have a very good program. Help us make it engaging so people actually engage with us, right? Because at the end of the day, the compliance teams are really trying to be a partner versus a lot of times they're seen as, hey, we're coming in to slap your wrists. But yeah, other times there's definitely convincing, right? I mean, there's times where we'll come in and a chief compliance officer will want, hey, cartoons and whimsical, let's make it fun. And then we'll bring that to, somebody else and they'll go, no, that would not go well here. People would not appreciate that.
Not how we do things.
People. Yeah. So it's very customized to the company, to your audience. And then a lot of times, what style does that chief compliance officer have and how are they building that culture of compliance? And you sort of pull it all together in like a larger branded rollout program.
Yeah. And of course, like many companies today, I imagine AI is going to have an impact on the e-learning world. Are you keeping your eye on that? And what are your thoughts on the impact that's going to have?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, our core, we're content creators, right? So AI is definitely going to have an impact. So yeah, we're already, we've got some folks using it. We built out some custom GPTs to try those out, and even bringing automation into the picture. I feel like that's a really big area where tying those two together, there's a lot of potential. So yeah, it's going to be a big opportunity in the learning space, and we're already trying to use it in what we do and coming up with ideas. Right? You talk about creative ideas. That's a great way to, to get more ideas outside.
Idea generation is definitely a big one. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Dan, this has been great. I'm going to wrap up by asking my gratitude question. I'm a big fan of expressing gratitude, especially to those who've helped you along the way in your journey. So any other entrepreneurs, any other peers, any other contemporaries that you would want to shout out and thank for helping you in your journey?
Yeah, I think with EO, I mean, the mentors in there, I'm part of the EO mentor program, and I've had 2 mentors so far, and the 2 of them have just been incredible, right? I mean, they're so busy at large organizations, C-suite folks, and they're willing to take the time to sit down with me and help me brainstorm and grow an organization. So I would say that EO mentor program for sure is a big one.
Great. All right, Dan, where can people go to learn more about you and LHT?
LinkedIn is a great one. And then on our website, LHTlearning.com would be the other spot. Yeah, feel free to reach out if you have questions, or love to connect with folks.
Dan, thanks so much.
I appreciate it, John.
Thanks for listening to the Smart Business Revolution podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.